and welcome to our video for our course study for GCSE Psychology. This is the Braun, Ellis and Loftus study, which fits into our memory topic, and it's the study that looks at supporting the idea that we reconstruct our memory with information from previous experience or conversations, or in this case advertisements, and has a look at how that can have an impact on our memories. Now, as you're aware from looking at the theory of reconstructive memory, there is lots of previous research that looks at how our memories can be affected by the information around us. Elizabeth Loftus is famous for looking at things like leading questions and how the way the question is phrased can have an impact on how we recall our memories, or the information that might get added to our memories from those leading questions. We can take information from them and assume that we need to add information. And the issue with this is that we're never really confident of what is the original memory and what is the memory that we have altered or added to based on the information in the questions. So this idea has also been used by advertisers. There are lots of advertisements out there that use our previous information, our previous knowledge, perhaps what we did as children, perhaps what it felt like to be children, those happy autobiographical memories. And they can be used in adverts to make us feel good about the product. Now, if we feel good about the product, we're more likely to buy the product. So what advertisers are trying to do is make us feel immersed in the world, give us an impression that the product can make us feel like we're children again, or even make us feel like we've actually been there, so we buy into their product. So the aim of this study was to see just how much of an impact those autobiographical memories in adverts can have on the memories that we have from our childhood. So the idea was that if we give people adverts, will it have an impact on how they reconstruct those memories? Will they add the adverts to their existing memories? And at the extreme end, will they actually believe that those adverts happened? Now, this study used a lab experiment. Now, a lab experiment is a really good evaluation point for some of our studies, but please be careful when you're using lab experiment as an evaluation point that you're saying exactly why it's an evaluation point. For example, in this study, it's a positive evaluation point. It's really helpful because it allows us to control all the other variables, so we can be sure that the only thing having an impact is our independent variable. So for this situation, using a lab experiment is a positive evaluation point. However, if you are looking at some social situations, then a lab experiment may not be a positive evaluation point. It may actually be a negative evaluation point, because it may mean that the controlled environment in a lab experiment means you're not measuring normal natural behaviour. So when you're writing your answers, please expand on your evaluation point and state whether this is a positive or a negative and exactly why. We use independent measures in this study because our participants are only going to take part in one condition or the other. This is necessary because if they watch both adverts, then there can be some confusion between the adverts and how it's affected each particular memory. So it's important they only take part in one. That does cause us issues with individual differences. We may have some differences between the participants we randomly allocate to condition 1 or condition 2, but it's better that they only watch one advert, so that outweighs the possible individual differences we might encounter. We're using a self-report questionnaire to collect quantitative data and qualitative data. That gives us a good analysis because we're able to turn the quantitative data into mean scores, average scores, and we can use the qualitative data to add some background behind those mean scores. Our independent variable is the advert that's shown. There's a few different adverts in this experiment, and the dependent variable is the score on a life events inventory. Now, there's one particular question that we are interested in, and that is the question of, did you meet and shake hands with your favourite TV character? Now, we're going to give them this events inventory to complete twice in this experiment. So there is a week's difference between completing it the first time and completing it the second time. And Braun was interested in the score that changed. And what was the difference between week 1 score and week 2 score? The sample that Braun used for this experiment was 107 undergraduate students. They were chosen from a Midwestern university in America. And that again is going to cause us an evaluation point, because although that's a nice easy sample to get hold of, it doesn't mean it's automatically generalizable to other people in other cultures or other countries, other age groups, and we would need to be very, very careful if we then generalize these results from this experiment to other areas. Now, the other issue that you might be able to add in as an evaluation point is that participants received a course credit for their involvement. Now, we would say as psychologists that the people taking part in our research should always be voluntary, and my question would be that if you are paid with a course credit, does this mean that your participation is truly involuntary, It's just something to think about. So week 1 of the study, the participants were randomly assigned to one of two groups. They were either put in the Disney group where they watched the Disney World advert, or they were put in a non-Disney advert group. They were also asked to answer the questions on the life events inventory, and along with our really important "did you shake hands with your favourite TV character" question, there were lots of other questions and tasks that Braun put into that life events inventory, and that was to disguise what the true nature of the study was. If Braun had just asked the one question, it would have been very obvious very quickly to the participants what the study was trying to measure. When the participants came back for week 2, they watched the same advert again, but with a different researcher in the room, and they were asked to imagine themselves in the situation. Now, this is the qualitative part of the study. They wrote down how the advert made them feel, whether they felt immersed in it, whether they felt they'd been there, and they had some attitude scales and empathy scales that they used to rate how the advert made them feel. They were then given a 5-minute distraction task. Now, the idea of this is that that's 5 minutes where they're not thinking about the advert, they're not concentrating on the study, they're not thinking about the questions they're asked. And again, this makes sure that we are getting some nice natural behaviour, that the participants aren't picking up on any demand characteristics that might give them a clue as to what the study is looking at. So then at the end of the distraction task, something unusual happens. The researcher that they dealt with for week 1 comes rushing into the room, very, very panicked, and says that they've had a problem encoding the life events inventory that they completed in week 1. It's all a disaster, and they need to complete the inventory again. Now, obviously, this is a bit of a deception, and the idea is it's an excuse to get the participants to complete the inventory for a second time. Now, of course, what Braun is looking for is the differences between that inventory at week 1 and the differences between that inventory at week 2. And of course, the main difference is that by now they have watched that advert. So we'll be interested to see what Braun's results were as to whether that advert has had an impact on what the participants recall and what they write on that events inventory. So then there is another distraction task, just to make sure that they are not picking up on any demand characteristics, they're not guessing what the research is about. And a third experimenter comes in to ask them a questionnaire about their memory of visiting Disney World. Now, finally, before they leave the experiment, they are then asked again what if they know what the research was about, if they had any ideas, and also their thoughts on whether they thought the advert had affected their memory. Now, this is really important because Braun wants to be sure that there are no demand characteristics, and also wants to see whether people are aware that these kind of things can be altering their memory. Remember, we said right at the start that actually we are confident in our own memories, and if someone said, well, your memory has been altered by something that happened, we wouldn't be able to tell what was the original memory and what was the altered memory. So this is a really good opportunity to ask participants what they think, and then of course compare it with their results. Okay, so what did the results find then? Well, firstly, the important thing to note about Braun's experiment is that there were independent researchers analysing the results. Now, this is really important. They didn't know what the study was looking at, so we can be sure that there is no bias coming from the people rating the results. Now, you can do a correlation with the people who were rating the results, the researchers who were working out whether Braun's results were significant, and they had really good inter-rater reliability, which means that both of the people who were analysing the results were analysing them in the same way. Okay, and that is a really positive evaluation point because it means that the results are going to be reliable. So 65% of those who watched the Disney advert, the autobiographical advert, mentioned Disney in their life events inventory. 74% said the advert had caused them to imagine the experience. So being able to imagine yourself there at Disney World, what it would be like to immerse themselves in it just from the information in the advert. 63% said they would visit Disney World in the future, and that's a really important point from an advertisement point of view, because it means that 63% of the people who are watching that advert are going to go and buy that product or visit that place, and of course that's the whole point of the advertisement. Okay. Another key point for our results is that even those people who had never been to Disney World said that they could imagine themselves there, and that's purely from the information from the advert. So it was autobiographical enough that it could invoke those feelings of empathy, and they could imagine what it would be like to be there themselves. Okay, so the main conclusion of the study is that more participants in the Disney advert group increased their score on the life events inventory in week 2. So what does that mean for us then? So 90% of the people who watched the Disney advert remembered meeting and shaking hands with their favourite TV character when they visited Disney World as a child, and that was compared to only 47% of the control group. So following on from watching that advert, a significant number of people changed their answer in the second questionnaire. So they may not have remembered doing it in the first week, but then following on from watching the advert, they did remember it. And of course, the only thing that's changed between week 1 and week 2 is they've watched that Disney advert. So that change must be linked to them watching that advert. The advert also increased the number of positive thoughts about Disney. So just watching that advert can make your memories seem more positive, or you can change your opinion of something just based on that advert. For those people who described the park, there was lots of words that they used to describe the park that were also in the advert. So they used some of the terminology that was in the advert, things like magical and cool rides, things that they'd seen and heard in the advert. So that had also had an impact on how they recalled the park itself. So Braun, Ellis and Loftus didn't stop there. They wanted to see if they could affect memories by the type of information they put in the adverts, and to do this they did a second part to their experiment using the same basic ideas and the same resources. This one was also an independent measures, so we have 167 undergraduate psychology students from the universities in America, and they're split into 3 different groups, and each group is going to watch a different advertisement. The first one is a Disney advertisement that talks about shaking hands with Bugs Bunny. The second one is a Disney advertisement talking about shaking hands with Ariel. And the third one is a control group, and it's still a Disney World advertisement, but for this one there's no autobiographical information. It is just a factual advert that's talking about opening times and ride times and prices, that kind of thing. Now the idea is that the information based in these adverts will have an impact on the memory that's recalled at the second in the second week when those questionnaires are filled in. Now the really important thing that you probably already picked up on is that Bugs Bunny is not a Disney character, so there's no way that you could have shook hands with Bugs Bunny. And although Ariel is a Disney character, she didn't make an appearance till after the memories that we're trying to recall. So when these students were children, Ariel wasn't a character that was at Disney World. She hadn't been created then, the movie hadn't been made. Okay. So this part 2 ran exactly the same as part 1, with watching the video and then coming back and filling in the life events inventory. There was a big difference in how involved people felt in the adverts. Those who'd watched the 2 autobiographical adverts felt much more involved in Disney World and in the adverts than the people who had just watched the factual Disney adverts. The really interesting thing is how confident they felt when they rated whether they remembered shaking hands with their favourite character. So 76% felt that they had confidently shook hands with Ariel, 78% said they'd confidently shook hands with Bugs Bunny, and there was also a percentage of confidence in the non-autobiographical group, but it was worded slightly different, so it didn't include the Ariel and Bugs. They were just asked, did you shake hands? How confident are you that you shook hands with your favourite character? That was 62%. So you can see that all 3 adverts are still having an increase, but interestingly, those Ariel and Bugs results are really significant, as they could not possibly have happened. So that has got to be a false memory. So our conclusions for our second part then. Autobiographical adverts can make people more likely to believe an event happened, even if it's impossible. And that's a really significant conclusion. It tells us an awful lot about how our memories are constructed, and also the problems that these kind of things can cause, and especially if we're using our memory for things like eyewitness testimony, then this can have a real issue for people in court settings. Autobiographical adverts can create false memories, and that's been seen really clearly with those people who felt they had shaken hands with Bugs Bunny or Ariel the Mermaid, as there's no way that could have happened. Okay, so our key conclusion then has got to be whether this study supports our theory. So remember, this is the idea that we reconstruct our memory, that it's not all there like photographs in our minds stored somewhere in different stores, that we use the information that we've got to fill in the blanks and reconstruct it. And this makes an awful lot of sense when we think about the amount of memories that we have, how difficult they are to store and find afterwards, and also how sometimes we forget things and other things are remembered. So there's lots of information that we can use to reconstruct these memories. It can either be our own previous experience, it can be schemas that we have developed that help us fill in the gaps, it can be discussions and things that we've talked about with other people. Those events that we talk about get added to our own version of the memory, and also the leading questions, those cues and clues we can take from the information people are giving us, including things like pictures of Bugs Bunny on Disney adverts. Okay, so in conclusion, yes, it definitely supports the idea that we reconstruct our memory. It shows that there is lots of practical application in terms of we need to be careful about how we're asking questions of our witnesses, and also it gives us practical applications for advertisements, that advertising campaigns can use this idea, make us feel like children, and we will be more likely to buy their product. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. I hope that's helped, and good luck in the exams.